Start streaming. You gonna do the thing? You're doing the thing. All right. I am Zach, and this is with thunderous applause. Welcome, my friend.
And I am Steve, and this is a podcast where two friends get together and talk about current events and other things.
Like Star Wars, preferably.
Yeah, we were just talking about it, and you stopped in the middle of the Kenobi fight.
Yeah, because I already know.
Spoilers, by the way.
I guess, yes. Spoilers if you haven't watched the last episode of Kenobi, just like fast
Which has
forward,
been out for
like
over a week, and if you haven't watched it, then you can go fuck yourself.
I can go fuck myself, apparently, because I haven't finished it.
But yeah, I can't even go online, fast forward, like,
bro. 5 minutes. Why can't you go online?
No, like until I watch the episode, like I'll just stay off of YouTube entirely because I'll be scrolling and my subscriptions will have it's like, come on, bro. Like, don't put that shit in the fucking title and the thumbnail, man.
Yeah, see, I'm not subscribed to the sort of things that would give away spoilers for things. I don't know. I just managed to avoid them every time. It's pretty impressive, actually. I have pretty good luck.
Well, I'm also super paranoid that I'm not necessarily like fishing for them or afraid that I'm going to get some gigantic spoiler, but like, I just don't want the possibility, you know?
Yeah.
So we watched it, I think, we watched it Wednesday at like 1 a.m.
Well, I managed to go from whenever it was released, what was it, last Wednesday? Till today with no spoilers. So, I mean, woohoo!
Good for you. Yeah, we were talking about that show and the need for the franchise to do different things. Although, I sometimes pop into some of I've mostly unsubbed from a lot of these folks, but like I do want to tell a story because we were last episode we said we were going to talk about June 19th and Juneteenth, and we are not.
We are bad.
Although I'll send you the link, Zach, and we can include it in the show notes.
Okay.
I want to say Vice just did a piece on the community the neighborhood in Buffalo, or a neighborhood in Buffalo, and how they're kind of dealing with the aftermath of like a racially motivated mass shooting at a grocery store. It's really not appropriate. I mean, to suffice to say, Black people, white people, brown people, people of conscience want fucking police to stop murdering people. And we don't want our budgets going to murder Black and brown people and terrorize their communities. And we don't want them terrorizing our unhoused neighbors. Like, we want those resources to go towards social goods. Would you agree? Like public housing.
Oh yeah. I mean, and every time someone does successfully litigate with the police, the taxpayers end up paying for it. And there's $1.5 million that could have gone to something else if the cops had kept it in their holsters.
Right. Exactly. And it's a military force. I mean, the local junior college has a police academy, and they march around, and it sounds and looks exactly like a military training base does. They're like singing Jodies and shit, like, and then they wonder why, like, they are trained to be an occupying force, right? But anyway,
right.
I don't really feel like we need to comment and be like, oh yeah, see, you know, Black folks think the government is fucking stupid because we want cops to stop terrorizing communities and stop murdering people. And instead they're like, okay, here's a holiday. And we made the joke before, you come out of banking, back of the house stuff. But like poor service workers don't get fucking Juneteenth, huh? It's a fucking bank holiday.
Yeah. And pretty much nothing else.
Right. And I appreciate, at least in the UK, they don't try to, like, my understanding is they don't try and like find some excuse to have a Monday off and a bank holiday. Basically, they just call it bank holiday.
Yeah,
and the banks are closed. They're like, the banks need to be closed periodically for whatever reason. I don't understand.
Yeah. You got to make sure your money doesn't disappear.
I cut you off. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, you got to make sure your money doesn't disappear. Sure would be a shame if all your hard-earned savings just went away.
I know. Oh, which brings us to today's topic, inflation.
Yeah, where all your hard-earned money just goes away.
It disappears. It no longer has the purchasing power it did. We did
and
just kind of, Oh yeah, it's changed my outlook in a lot of ways, even though I saw that shit coming. So we did already start to kind of check in on the Star Wars by talking about Star Wars, but you also mentioned that you had to do first aid on your cat, and you
Yeah.
had explained it.
At 5:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I get up and I happen to go over towards the window and I notice there is fresh, rather, still like pinkish red blood on the curtains. And I'm like, what is going? No, because our cat has a wound right here, which is really hard to dress, by the way, and it's been healing, and we've been like, cleaning it up and applying Neosporin and all that crap, and he reopened it. And it's just so damn hard because we have litter box that you have to like crawl inside of to use, and so you can't really put the Elizabethan cone on them because he can't go to the bathroom. So I think we're just going to have to end up buying a cheap one for him to use in the meantime. But man, he just like ripped it all the way open. All the scab that had been forming completely gone. We're like,
and he's like rubbing on something. Is that it?
No, he scratches at it, and then we also found out that one of the other cats like will just lick that spot and just like continuously lick it until it's raw. And we don't know if that's what caused it or if he's doing it in response to like, oh, that smells bad, let me get that for you, or like, oh, that looks bad, let me lick it for you and clean it. But every time he does, the scab goes away, we start over, and so it's like we're fighting on two freaking fronts. We gotta put cones on two cats, it seems like.
Oh boy, I think once you got the cone on the cat with the injury, the other one wouldn't be able to get.
Yeah, it's probably fine. I mean, he tried. I watched him.
Oh really? Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, on my front, I've just been trying to get some projects done around the house, and then I live in the Central Valley, so it's like 105 fucking degrees outside. So.
Yeah, it's pretty shitty. It's 104 here today. I think it might have got up to 107. I haven't checked.
You're a bit warmer than I am, but
yeah,
still fucking hot.
I was moving compost around. We had a day where it was like 80 or something like that. The clouds rolled in, and so I moved the compost from over by the wall to like on top of this redwood tree that we have. Not the trunk, like it's several feet away from the trunk. But basic idea was I wanted the water that seeps down to carry the nutrients down to the redwood tree because it's looking sad. Like it's not getting enough. It's probably not getting enough water. Enough nutrients. I know it tapped into the sewage because our sewage got blocked up when we first moved in.
Oh yeah, that trees will do that shit.
Yeah, it broke through. It was pretty cool.
Yeah,
strawberries are doing good though.
Good. That's good. Yeah, man. I'm just trying to keep water on stuff. I got a chicken that keeps springing the coop. We don't know how she's getting out, but she's getting out, and every afternoon she's like trying to get in and can't. It's like if you want to sneak out, you gotta be able to sneak back in. Like, and apparently chickens don't have that basic common sense.
Yeah.
Because like we were like, oh shit, the chicken's out. How long has she been out? We finally heard her, and then she's like, she doesn't want to be around us, which is weird because like she's normally she's like one of the more approachable ones. I think that feels comfortable, like
escaping,
going out and exploring and shit. But when she's out and wants back in, that's when she freaks out. Maybe because she's worried we're fucking mad at her. I mean, I did threaten to break her neck once. It was just a joke, but like, just choking a chicken. It's fucking funny. To me, it's not funny to a chicken, apparently.
You say what?
Anyway, I'm gonna be like, I'll choke that chicken. Anyway, bad joke. Yes, she runs away, and so it's kind of a pain in the dick. It's not too hard to herd her in. Like, they're pretty smart when it comes to like, maneuvering them. They know where the gate is, right? Like,
yeah.
But as soon as she gets in, she's like drinking water. How they like pick some up and then they tip their head back. She's fucking. So it's like, dude, like, what if we're gone for a weekend? Like, y'all are gonna die of thirst.
Yeah.
And like, so I'm like, fuck, dude, like, why is she sneaking out? Are they out of food? I go check the food. No, you got plenty of food. I was throwing, like, we had some kind of lettuce that started to bolt that we didn't get to eating. And so I'm like pitching that back, and they have snacks, they have food, they have water. She just wants to get out and eat fucking bugs and scratch at shit she doesn't normally get to scratch at. And then she's going to die of thirst because of it.
Why did the chicken jump the coop? To get to the tasty food.
So dealing dealing with heat mostly, trying to get shit done outside, but like
this heat's fucking insufferable.
only having like a couple hours a day. And I'm not a morning person, right? Like everybody's like, oh, you just got to wake up really early. And I'm like, really early for me today was today. And then like fucking 8:30 and it's like 95 degrees outside. Like
Yeah.
there's not really like how early do I need to wake up? And the reality is that like I just need to use like portable floodlights and just do work at night, because at night it's like 70 or 68 or whatever.
Wow, lucky
And
you.
that is a comfortable temperature to do hard labor. It's
Oh
just
yeah. I'm saying it doesn't get that cold around here at night. It's still up in like 70s and 80s.
No, Fresno really like Fresno is probably maybe like Bakersfield might be a bit worse, and Redding is probably the worst in the valley. Redding is just like,
oh, Redding's terrible.
I don't understand why people live there, but that's where all the fascists go.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, literally, I'm not making that as a joke.
They all cook to their
and
brains.
There's cool fucking people in Redding. Don't get me wrong. Like,
yeah,
there's
cool
radicals doing radical things, you know, but there's a lot of fascists too, as we've discussed, right?
Yeah. Well, it certainly doesn't help that we've covered practically everything in asphalt here.
Yeah. And Redding is just kind of, it's where it is. It's so far from the Delta that like there is no relief from the Delta breeze at all. Like, so there's just like a hot pocket at the north end of the valley that doesn't get any kind of, the air just kind of settles there. It's hot.
Yeah. Not sponsored.
Yeah. And lots of asphalt. Yeah. Concrete and rangeland, right? There's not, I mean, the Sacramento River, there's a few creeks or whatever, but like there's not a lot of riparian areas and forested areas and stuff. It's just kind of rangeland. I mean, but then right past Redding, it's just nothing but forest for all the way to Alaska or whatever, right? Like a couple cities, but mostly forest. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Nice checking in.
Yeah, man. It's doing all right. And not much has changed recently.
Not much has changed with me either.
Went to a concert.
Oh, yeah. How was that? You went to the Flowbots, you said?
Yeah, Flowbots in San Francisco at a venue called Bottom of the Hill, which is a lie. It is not quite at the bottom of the hill. There's like one more block, and then you're at the bottom of the hill. But interesting venue. It's like you come in, there's the bar. There's, if you keep moving forward, there's the actual stage. And if you move past it, there's like a kitchen and like an eating/lounge area that's adjacent to the exterior door where you go for smoking. And then all the talent goes through the smoke pit upstairs to like change or get away from fans or whatever. And it comes back down, which is kind of crappy for the acts that don't smoke, because I got to pass right through the smoke pit. But it's probably part of the life. But yeah, good concert.
Part of the life.
Yeah, and we stayed near the stage. Got to watch all the fun shit happening. Watch the violin string break, and then later on the bow string break. Like, holy shit! I guess that's what you get when you're like jumping around playing the violin.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah.
Well, right on, man. Today we're talking about inflation. Suffice to summarize, saving
is pointless. We're never going to own anything. Just buy what you want.
We talked about the World Bank saying that shit too, huh? You'll own nothing and be happy, or what? Wasn't the World Bank? It was fucking one of those international institutions that's run by absolutely fucking insanely wealthy people.
Yeah. Combine inflation.
The Davos group or some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, you combine that with rental culture and
World Economic Forum.
It's gonna be true. But that's gotcha. The WEF. Yeah. All right, let's get to this first one.
And this is let's set it up real quick. It's Brianna Joy Gray on her podcast Bad Faith, talking to author about
Cory Doctorow.
Do it.
Here we go.
Well, no, let's start with a refresher on what has caused the inflation to begin with.
Sure. So inflation in economic terms is almost mystical because it's a sustained rise in the price level. So what does that mean? Well, how do you know when a price rise is sustained or transient? What is the price level as opposed to the price of one thing? You know, if Pokemon cards go up, we don't say we have inflation, right? So the price level is the level of goods. And so there's a lot of room for people to kind of go, well, I don't think it's sustained, or now it's sustained, or the level has gone up or the level hasn't gone up. I think that to understand the root issue of inflation, it's when people are bidding on something that there isn't enough of and the price goes up. And because your pal there from Fox News was right. When more people try to buy something, if the supply doesn't change and the demand goes up, then the price goes up too. You have bidding wars. And the question that the right likes to ask, and I think the liberal press too, is like, is there too much money in the economy trying to buy stuff? It's not a crazy question. You know, like we could say, well, when Donald Trump decided to pump trillions of dollars into the capital markets by buying junk bonds, did it blow up the price of, among other things, Pokemon cards, but also the stock market and, you know, rare wine and Warhol paintings and all the other things that people who have all their basic needs go out and spend money on when suddenly there's a lot of money for them? I think too much money can, in fact, cause inflation. But there's another thing that causes inflation, the other side of the supply and the demand interaction, which is how much stuff there is. Now,
and Corey, a little birdie is telling me, I seem to recall that we are in a supply chain crisis.
So that is definitely a big part of it, but I think that it would be a mistake to end it there, right? So it's definitely true. We are having a supply chain crisis. It is worth asking, how did we end up in a circumstance where the supply chain crisis is as bad as it is now? You know, clearly a global pandemic was always going to cause supply chain disruptions, but like, how do we end up with 4 companies running all the world's shipping who persistently ignored the advice of regulators and experts who said, you know, I know you get an economy of scale when you make the ship bigger, but eventually it's going to get caught in the Suez Canal. And they were like, no, that'll never happen, right? How did these firms end up doing this? Well, I think that, you know, when markets become very concentrated, then they can thumb their nose at experts and regulators. They can, you know, they can claim that only they understand their industry. It's often true. You know, if you think about the bad FCC chairman that we had under Trump, he was a Verizon lawyer, Ajit Pai. And then the good one we had under Obama, Tom Wheeler, was a cable lobbyist, right? Because when the industry consists of 3 to 5 giant firms, really like only insiders have a good picture of what's going on in it. And so, yeah, you end up with just bad regulation. You end up with firms just being able to do whatever they want. Another thing that happens when firms are really concentrated is they can jack up prices. So instead, it isn't that the prices go up just because there's not enough to go around, but prices can also go up because as the CEOs of a bunch of companies in consumer packaged goods and oil and other industries that are really closely related to the daily consumption habits of most people, they keep telling their shareholders, you know, Americans have been told by the press to expect inflation, so we're raising prices. Not because our costs have gone up or because there's supply chain shock or because we can't get Russian gas, but because we think that this is the moment where we can raise prices without people building guillotines on our
so they can launder price gouging under the guise of these expectations that there is in fact inflation.
100%. But, you know, I think that even if these companies were held to account and forced not to price gouge, even if we'd had better regulation and we had more efficient supply chains that had a little more slack in them, we would still have a problem. And the reason we'd have a problem is because things are very brittle. And the reason things are brittle is that for 40 years, we've pursued a just-in-time financial strategy for our industries that says, you know, the most efficient way to run an industry is to take all the capital that is fallow, so anything that's not actually producing money at any given moment, and get rid of it. So, you know, you can see this at a fast food restaurant before the Great Resignation. If you've got someone you've hired to flip burgers and no one's ordering a burger, you send them home because they're on a 0 hours contract. The problem is that if a school bus full of kids pulls up, you can't get them back again, right? So everybody understands that there are some limits to that. We've sent home all the people who make burgers, but not just all the people who make burgers. You know, I'm speaking to you from California. After the SARS epidemic, the first one, California very wisely spent $200 million on a stockpile for pandemic preparedness. We bought a ton of ventilators. We bought a ton of N95s. We bought enough equipment to turn, I think it was 100 gymnasiums or community halls into field hospitals and 2 fully mobile field hospitals. And that cost about $5 million a year to maintain. So I had to go and recharge the batteries, and you need to pay for warehouses, and you had to throw away the stuff that got old and whatever. And after the great financial crisis, that $5 million was no longer in the budget. So we basically gave that stuff away to save money. And, you know, when the COVID pandemic hit, our problem wasn't that we didn't have enough money, right? Our problem was that we didn't have enough ventilators. And there are versions of that throughout the entire economy that we decided, for example, that we should make all of our microprocessors in China and Taiwan. Used to be a lot of onshore microcontroller manufacturing. In fact, we have a whole region of California called Silicon Valley because they used to make microchips there, right? There's no silicon in Silicon Valley anymore. They don't make chips there anymore. They design them and they get them made somewhere else. So when Taiwan shuts down or China shuts down, then you just can't get the microcontrollers that you need for everything else. Those were industrial policy choices, right? Someone decided to tax advantage that. Someone decided that the tariff should be structured to encourage it. You know, all of those industrial choices that we made produced an outcome where one little thing goes wrong and the whole thing starts to fall apart, and it's very hard to put together again.
Can you, oh, I was going to be like, can you pause it there? But that was, I think, where I had originally told you to, huh? Oh, you're muted, son of a bitch.
Fuck. Anyway, I'm mostly on it. I was just about to say I'm on it. I'm mostly on it. That's what I do. That's what I do before the shows is I set up the start and the stop points and the outro phrases. So I kind of get an idea of where to stop. There's got to be a more efficient way to do it. And one day I'll figure it out. But
I'm sure there is.
Yeah.
Because some people are really good. My partner, this is a total aside we don't need to go into. My partner listens to a lot of podcasts. And I'm like, fuck, man, the production value. They're talking about Game of Thrones, which is like 10 years old now?
Yeah.
But like, and they're like, oh, yeah, this podcast, we're just rewatching Game of Thrones and we're going to talk about it. And I'm like, but the production value is like A+. Like the flow is good and the audio quality is good and all that other shit. I'm like, I don't know how to do this, man. I'm just making it up as I go.
I have told myself I had to cancel summer class because it was going to be calculus, and I have had problems with calculus in the past, believe it or not. And so I put it off till the fall semester, and I had told myself I'm going to use this summertime, the next month or so, to learn at least some basics in DaVinci Resolve and how to do some fades in OBS so that we can hopefully cut in different things, just make it look a little bit nicer. We'll see if I can actually accomplish that or not.
Cool. Well, back to the subject matter at hand.
Yeah.
Two things were said in that clip that I think are incredibly important. Did I get you the Martinson clip?
Chris Martinson?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Because he's going to talk a lot about the money printing, right?
Yeah.
The problem with that. This guy really focused kind of in on the supply chain, but more importantly, because the supply chain is another component. But what I appreciated about this clip, and Bree is delightful, as I've said in this space before, and he seems to be a pretty sharp guy. But he's talking about market consolidation and monopolies. So like that as a problem with inflation, it's like, yeah, but sometimes it's literally just the company says, I can raise prices and people will pay it. Now that happens with oil. And now Martinson, we're not going to cover this. Martinson doesn't cover this later in the clip, but like he talks a lot about oil availability, and we've talked about peak oil and energy contraction and all that other stuff. So that's a really important part of the conversation is the monopolies and the ability to just charge people and the inelastic demand for things like petroleum, for things like housing, for things like healthcare, food, where you can raise the prices and people are still going to fucking pay it because it's literally a basic necessity in our society.
Right.
Or any society, really. Housing, healthcare, food. Those are the fucking basics, right? The things we need to sustain our bodies. And so the monopoly part is not really largely a part of the conversation. You hear a lot of people on the more conservative end of the economic ideological spectrum being like, oh, this is because you just want your social programs, right? Like, or oh, it's because the Fed just prints money, but they never say prints money and hands it to fucking the banks and gigantic corporations.
Right. They don't follow the money.
Right. They just say, oh, it's they're printing money and like the government is spending money and that all that. And there is another part of that clip that people should check out where they do talk about like government providing certain goods and what the consequences of that. Would that be inflationary if, say, the government just started buying up like pigs and then like giving hams to poor people like they did during the Great Depression?
Right.
Would that be inflationary? It's possible if they don't also increase production. So they could totally buy the supply and wouldn't hurt if they're also investing in more production at the same time. So the monopolies is a big part of that. And then he kind of, at the end of that clip where I asked you to stop, or we had planned to stop, he talks about basically like complexity, especially complex supply chains, and how fucking vulnerable they are. And there's a guy, I haven't read the book yet, but I've watched lectures. I've watched his lectures and I've listened to a dozen people and read a half a dozen different articles that refer directly to him. Named Joseph Tainter. He was an anthropologist. He studied primarily in, I think, indigenous peoples of the Southwest. And he looked at like the Chaco Canyon culture in depth. And that civilization, because that's what it was, right? It was a corn growing civilization of the Southwest. And it fell apart due to drought and other kind of factors. But ultimately, his thesis is that like complex societies break down in cascading and catastrophic ways because when you continue to add complexity on top of complexity, right? We have a problem. What do? Oh, we can't burn gasoline anymore. What do we do? Okay, let's like make a lithium mine here and we'll manufacture cars over here and then we'll do all that. All you're doing is adding complexity on top of complexity. And then what happens is, a ship fucking blocks the Suez Canal and all of a sudden you can't get like one component for the electric vehicle that you're trying to, get people to purchase because you don't want them burning gasoline.
Yeah.
And so complex societies just have more vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Like think of a machine. Like I'm sure you can think of an example, but like
a piano. I watched a great video about how a piano is peak of design because you go through and you see all the individual parts of like pressing a key and what it requires and what happens if you don't have this next piece and this next piece and this next piece, but it is literally just the minimum number of pieces in order to get a piano to behave the way in which we want a piano to behave, and no more complex.
Yeah, and then compare that to like a synthesizer or keyboard.
Yeah, or even just our huge bureaucracies where it's like there's so many extra layers that don't need to be there, and so of course things start to fail almost immediately as soon as any one piece starts to break or slow down.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think I might have brought this example up in a previous show, but locally, anytime something has to deal with a creek, is there like fucking 3 different agencies you have to get?
Right, and how it costs millions of dollars in order to get anything accomplished.
But I mean,
it's like there's trash. Go remove the trash. It's not that hard.
The permits like pay for the staff time and other things, and like I'm okay with like structuring a bureaucracy in such a way that like it produces some of its own income, so that we have discretionary monies for other things, ideally housing foremost, maybe mental health care, shit like that. But instead, those multiple bureaucracies doesn't make it any better. All it does is make it more difficult to do things that need to be done. And that's again, it's a characteristic of a complex society is that they'll have, more priests and more military, command structures and all sorts of things that take resources, right? And then make it decision making much slower. And that's what ultimately why we go from kind of more like you see from more like democratic or kind of more egalitarian forms, and you see this kind of cyclical nature of moving from more egalitarian forms like our ideal democracy, right? Into authoritarian forms, because like it just gets all gummed up and nothing can get fucking done, and like shit has to get done. And
Well,
so then people gravitate towards these people like the Donald Trumps that are like, I can get shit done.
Yeah.
I built buildings. That's what I did. Our infrastructure fucking sucks. I'm going to do all these amazing things. But instead, like, I'm just going to be a fucking basically play king for a while.
Yeah,
you know, like,
and it really is that people are absolutely willing to give up their democracy when they feel like things aren't going their way. You know, they're like, hey man, I don't care about freedoms if you can give me what I want, you know, like give me a job. And, you know, no one ever questions, like, is it the job that you want or the life that you want that the job can give you? You know, like,
yeah. And I mean, when people are fucking hungry, like we might have said, and I think, I don't know if it's this next Chris Martinson clip or not, or another one I looked at, but I passed on. But he's talking
there's a couple of them. I got one that's about 8 minutes long and another one that's about 4.
Okay, let's get to those, and then he might bring up what I was about to say about food insecurity, primarily.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
So at any rate, what do we see here in yellow? Quote, the U.S. Federal Reserve should stop buying bonds immediately to contain rampant inflation, a top investment manager of BlackRock said on Thursday, joining a chorus of Wall Street heavy hitters and investors who've been calling for swifter Fed action to contain rising prices. Why? Because rising prices are getting to be really politically and socially uncomfortable by the architects and the prime beneficiaries of that system, right? This being an election year, too, extra English on that ball because, of course, people tend to get very unhappy when they can't afford stuff because of inflation. And by the way, people have started to put the dots together. Inflation isn't like this rare comet that comes somewhere out of the Oort cloud to visit our, inner solar system every so often, magically and mysteriously. It is a matter of policy. Let me repeat that. Every bit of inflation you're experiencing is a matter of policy. It's a decision that was made by the Federal Reserve, a decision to stoke inflation, and then when they saw inflation starting, to not do anything about it. Those are decisions, not accidents, not random occurrences in nature that nobody can control or understand. Continuing, quote, in yellow, the biggest annual increase in inflation in 40 years and fueling market expectations that the Fed may increase rates more aggressively than anticipated to cool the economy. I don't think they will. I'll show you why in a second. In green, as it seeks to contain inflation, the U.S. Central Bank also plans to reduce its nearly $9 trillion balance sheet, which grew in size during the COVID-19 pandemic as the Fed bought bonds in the market to support the economy. Actually, no, they supported the wealth of the billionaires. It doesn't really do a lot for the economy. In case you didn't notice, the economy to you and me might include Main Street, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, households. They didn't get supported by any of this bond buying action by the Fed. I don't know of any small restaurant that stayed in business because the Fed was busy shoveling billions, if not trillions of dollars to its Wall Street buddies. That's just a silly notion there. All right. And by the way, when you just see here, they talked about the central bank plans to reduce its nearly $9 trillion balance sheet. They're talking about this thing right here that we just looked at. This thing, this nearly $9 trillion balance sheet. Okay. All right. Where was I? Oh yeah, right here. Check this out. So after the pandemic triggered recession, the Fed was buying $120 billion in treasuries. It's planning to bring those purchases to an end here in early March. One of the ways that it does that, of course, is it has to raise interest rates. And so this is a raise of the interest rates here. And this CNBC reporting here that what they're going to do, quote from the headline, there's more inflation coming as the Federal Reserve starts raising interest rates, I should say. In yellow, inflation continues to rise, and the Federal Reserve is expected to start taking action to combat it with a 0.25 point rate hike next week. All right. I'm laughing because this is just like this is a laughable move. Telegraphed way in advance, nothing surprising. The Fed only has a couple of tools in its toolkit, and one of them is the element of surprise. And they would surprise the market by doing something surprising. No surprise, they're telegraphing it. Don't worry, markets. We'll only put it up a quarter of a point, which is the smallest unit it could raise interest rates. So I mocked it up. To me, if you saw Saving Private Ryan, there's that scene at the end where Tom Hanks' character is shooting his 45 at a tank coming. This is how I mocked it up here. So inflation is that tank. Jerome Powell's hanging there with his shaky hands, and he's going to shoot a 25 basis point. That's a quarter point interest rate at this thing coming at him. It's too little, too late. It's laughably small. So that's why I'm putting this as an inflation alert. The Federal Reserve is not that they're incapable, because they do have the tools. They could do things. They could raise interest rates a surprise, 100 basis points, 150, really shock the markets. They could withdraw trillions of dollars from the market right away. They're not going to do that. So the Fed isn't incapable. They're just unwilling. And they don't want to do that because it gets really awkward at the parties there that they go to when, you cause some billionaire portfolios to shrink instead of grow, and people corner you with their Manhattans in hand and say, Jerome, what are you doing? I thought you could be trusted, good fellow. So at any rate, that's how I see that going. Now, of course, the Fed rate hike expectations shrunk because magically there's the Ukraine crisis. They're like, oh, because Ukraine, because COVID, we had to print a lot more. There's always a reason. It's never a good time to have political spine and take the heat and be willing to take the punch bowl away and be that guy, right? So Jerome might be a awesome dude, and I might like to hang out with him. I don't know. I've never met him. But I can tell you, as a leader, he has zero spine. None. He has no capability of going up against all the entrenched interests out there. So give him a weasel.
I'm not sure how much more of that we were going to play. I think it was like another 30 seconds or something.
2 minutes or so.
Oh shit. Okay. Yeah, I did want to I did want to touch on that because we the previous clip talked about monopolies. And I think it's really important to point out that, like, as societies collapse, like, you see this as one of the many components of the pattern. And that is that, like, the ruling class becomes absolutely insulated from what it's like to be a commoner, right?
Right.
And they do what's in their interest, and everybody else can go fuck themselves. And so when we're facing this and people are like, well, I was going to, like, cook dinner for my family. I was going to go get some chicken breast or whatever at the grocery store. And then they look at it and they're like, well, we can't afford chicken breast. I guess I'll get some ground beef. And then they say, oh, I can't really afford ground beef either. I guess you're going to just eat, like, potatoes. Like, the ruling class doesn't fucking understand what that's like. And so they will do whatever they can
to might have a little less caviar.
That's right. And to enrich themselves while we all get fucked. And I'm glad that Chris brought, and I want to point out, like, we're using his stuff obviously without permission. I believe it's under fair use, right, of the Copyright Act or whatever.
Should be. I'm not sure. Thanks, Chris.
But I just want to say, check out Peak Prosperity, which is his website.
Mm-hmm.
Follow him on YouTube. Watch the ads. Give him some money.
We referenced him before for the crash course.
Yeah, his crash course fucking changed my thinking about everything. It's available for free on the internet. I've tried to get other internet commentators, like, lower on some of the smaller fish in the pond, to look at Chris Martin saying now, so it can inform their politics that's still developing, because for all intents and purposes, they're fucking kids in, like, their early 20s and shit. Like,
yeah.
So watch that, inform yourself, but more importantly, like, support his work too. And we're grateful for being able to draw from it because he does an amazing job. Anyways, go ahead. Sorry, bud.
Oh no, it's totally fine. I mean, it kind of shows he's basically referencing Saving Private Ryan, which is a 24-year-old movie, older than some of the people you're talking about.
Indeed. Yeah,
So,
and that was I laughed. I mean, clearly, audibly, right? Like
yeah,
because it's a good fucking meme.
yeah, yeah.
It's a great meme.
Good
Who
job.
says an old man can't have a good meme game?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's an excellent point, that you're making about how you've got a whole bunch of people that uh, they're on the right path and everything, but they just don't have a life experience, maybe to see a bigger picture, and so maybe they can watch our show and get a little bit of a bigger picture, or watch
Maybe.
Chris.
And one of those things is like I appreciate too because he generally he's kind of was on the COVID skeptic side and got kind of sidelined
Lambasted.
and basically attacked by the algorithm and
Yeah.
the corporate powers that censor information. And he has always been a voice for just like asking questions.
Mhm.
And but anyway, through his questioning of COVID narratives, especially the kind of, don't question Dr. Fauci bullshit, he attracted a lot of conservative listeners. And I don't know his politics. He always kind of seems to be the middle of the road. But I really do appreciate that he also brings in this conversation that clear kind of transparently and quite explicitly class analysis. Because he's not I would,
Right.
if you said, oh, you're a Marxist, he would be like, fuck no, I'm not. I'm a capitalist. I worked on Wall Street for a long time. Like, blah, 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 right? And he's been doing financial reporting and this kind of thing with the crash course and stuff for a decade. And he would never call himself a Marxist, but like, he's just telling the truth. And the truth is, it's a fucking class war, right?
Well, yeah, and I think he said it well when he was pointing out that you basically have these people in high places making radical changes to an entire economic system, just to kind of get voters, like, shit, the vote's coming up. We better do some stuff.
And not just voters. He even brought it even to the more intimate level that he's like, people don't want to make, they have no spine because they don't want to make it awkward at their cocktail party.
Yeah.
And we literally live in a gilded age where like we were just saying, people can't get a affordable piece of chicken to feed their fucking kids at the grocery store because someone doesn't want to have an awkward conversation while they are served hors d'oeuvres and like super expensive fucking wine.
Yeah. And that's the disconnect that is really difficult. I don't know. It just makes you want to hang your head and then maybe hang some people.
How many people? So like, if I'm not mistaken, the Hamptons is at the end of the peninsula, right?
Oh God.
And so it's literally, there's nothing but sea on three sides. How many people do you think it would take
to surround them?
Yeah, to besiege them.
I mean, the thing is, it looks like they're pretty close to Long Island, Staten Island. They're surrounded by a lot of people that don't like them.
Yeah. And also, like, I mean,
it wouldn't be too hard to cut the police off.
We're making jokes about like siege warfare against the Hamptons.
Yeah.
But in reality, they'll just like go out onto their sprawling lawn and get in their fucking helicopter and fly away. So unless like you got the hookup on some Stinger missiles or something, I think we're fucked either way.
I mean, I think that the various insurgent groups have shown that you can fight high tech with low tech pretty effectively.
Ooh, I know. We'll just buy a bunch of those like little $50 drones from his Amazon.
Yeah.
And just like,
yeah.
Pilots be like, fuck, I'm not gonna fucking die for you. Fuck you.
Yeah. Just take your $50 drone, run it into the rotors. One of them's bound to cause some damage.
Yeah, or even just like create like a ceiling, right? Like they can't take off and fly because there's all these drones at 100 feet.
There's so many cheap ways to effectively knock out very expensive technology, and if there's nothing else that we've learned from all the our guerrilla wars that have taken place and all the insurgencies against America, it should be that with very little money you can effectively make a lot of people's rich rich is almost worthless.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and maybe we'll connect offline because it's completely unrelated to this, but I recall reading an article about how like ISIS was using 3D printers to like basically make drones that carried like little tiny, like,
Yeah,
half
little
a pound
bomblets.
bombs. Yeah, little tiny bombs.
I forget, but
holy
like
shit,
the
that's
the
wild.
military had a term for that, and it was basically, they acknowledged like by the time you heard them, it was already too late because they just ran in with the bomb at full speed for that little drone. Boom. There's no reason you couldn't do that to some helicopters.
Right, which of course we're not going to.
No, we're not advising violence.
But I'm
We're
just
simply
saying
stating that
that,
if you
like,
needed to.
this system is not sustainable.
Yeah.
This I'm going to make it so it's difficult for you to feed your family because I don't want to have an awkward conversation when I'm at a party.
Right.
That position cannot stand. Like, people aren't going to put up with that shit for much longer, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And for me, it's entirely strange because, like, you can look back at history and you can see that what the result of not giving people enough, money to feed their families is, and it's revolution, and it's heads on the ground, and it's bodies, heads on pikes, bodies broken, bleeding, like, it's terrible shit. And all you got to do is just give people a little bit more money, and they'll be fine. Like, it doesn't take a lot, but
you don't even have to give them fucking currency. You just have to ensure that their needs are met.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
land reform would do that. Take all the gigantic fucking corporate farms and shit and carve that up and give people a piece of land to fucking grow food on.
Yeah. Maybe a donkey too.
Yeah.
I want a donkey. They seem nice.
All right, let's see what else he's got to say in this clip. I almost want to say push forward to the next one, actually.
Let me get it.
Because he mostly goes on, and I was there was like a clean ending for me when I put the time on our sheet.
There was. I think it was 1754.
But I don't recall him talking about anything particularly unique from what he already said.
Not really. He just started talking about, printing money a little bit more, and, how... Jerome, what's his name, is
Powell.
Is basically at fault. Yeah, is basically at fault for all the inflation and the deficit. And the deficit is where the next clip picks up at.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Let's talk about the deficit, which is, I'll probably have some critiques of what he's saying here, but let's listen.
Sounds good.
So it's not just the Federal Reserve, but who they enable as well. This is federal fiscal recklessness, tracking the deficit down here at the bipartisanpolicy.org website. Good website for tracking this kind of stuff. Look at these deficits. So these are over here in billions of dollars. So this would be around $3 trillion right here. 2020, 2021, massive deficits. That means the government took in this much money, but spent that much. That's a deficit. And when we look at it this way, and 2021, 22 is probably going to be just as bad when we see how this all unfolds. At any rate, when you print money, when you spend money you haven't got, you got to do something. Well, they issue bonds, so the federal government goes further into debt. And then, but what if there were no buyers for all that debt? What if there's no buyers for $3 trillion of excess U.S. government debt? Don't worry. There's always a buyer, and that's what I showed you. The Federal Reserve is that buyer. So watch what's happening. This isn't very hard. Federal government prints and spends too much and writes a bond. Federal Reserve buys that bond with money printed out of thin air. So in essence, the U.S. government is printing money out of thin air and spending it. And that causes inflation. It's really not hard to understand. But Milton Keynes said that inflation is difficult to diagnose. Not one man in a million can diagnose its true causes. But that's just because it's a little sleight of hand. Somebody spends money they don't have, and somebody else prints it out of thin air to give it to them. Now, there's one extra step in there. The Fed doesn't directly do that because they go through a bank first. Doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. At any rate, looking at this, so this is just single year, so you can see how much the federal government is deficit spent in a.
Yes,
it's just inflation with extra steps.
Right, but I do want to challenge on that.
Okay.
The problem is, I mean, yes, that's how government spends money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like they receive your taxes and then spend money. That's MMT. And all my criticisms of MMT are the exact opposite of my criticisms of him, which is MMT thinks well, it doesn't matter. We just create money and therefore we can fund any social program. That's incorrect because it will cause inflation. He's incorrect in leaving out the most important part. You create the money, you put it into the economy to give velocity to it, to produce more value, and more importantly, to provide for people's basic necessities and, you know, maybe some luxuries. But the important thing is that you can't continue to increase the supply, as I understand it. You need to take it back out to avoid inflation. And the problem is that we don't have fucking tax rates for wealthy people to remove that back out. So we print the money, we hand it to the banks, and then we don't tax the banks. We don't tax the bankers, right? Yeah. And so it's not a bad thing to necessarily run a deficit if there's a plan.
Well, yeah, again, it's bad to do it for very, very long periods of time with no end in sight.
Right. And the more important point that he doesn't get to that I wanted to emphasize is that of our discretionary budget, it's something to the tune of like 65, 70% of it goes to the military. So it's not an issue of just running a deficit. It's that we're running a deficit on something that provides nothing. I don't want to say nothing, complicated issue. Much of what we benefit from in the United States, much of our wealth in the United States is because we're an empire and we suck resources, labor and material from around the world, right? So I don't want to say the military provides nothing in return because clearly it does. And that's just, you know, that's just reality. It's a reality I don't want, but that's the way it works currently. But the point is that like the government's not investing in productive capacities. Right. Bombs you get to use once. Like most of the tanks and airplanes, like we got entire fucking 1,000-acre sites covered in airplanes that are just like, oh, we flew them around for a while. They never saw combat because we didn't wind up needing to use them because fucking nuclear war was too scary. And now they're trash. And
we'll sell them to some other country, possibly.
So when people are like, oh, like there's no affordable housing, like we need more housing, but it's all private developers who are trying to squeeze max profit, then like, let's build some fucking housing. Or, oh, there's a shortage of meat packing because COVID hit the like 5 fucking places in the country, apparently, that we can like slaughter and package animals.
Right.
Why not invest and be like, no, we're going to build a packing plant here because there's a whole bunch of farmers who are already organized into some kind of cooperative or whatever. We are going to pay for the factory. It's going to be democratically managed. It's not going to be owned by a for-profit company. It's going to be a not-for-profit that provides for that need within that production chain, right? And then you wouldn't have inflation. If the government spent, $50 million to build a meatpacking plant where they needed a meatpacking plant, all it's doing is like making the production chain more reliable, which reduces inflation because now we're not dealing with supply chain disruption. And it would also reduce carbon emissions because now people don't have to put pigs on trucks and drive them 1,500 fucking miles to be slaughtered.
Right. Well, not even 1,500. A lot of the pork that I know of comes from like the Carolinas and gets shipped all the way across the country. It makes I almost knocked something over. It makes stops along the way in order to make sure how to drop them off at packing plants. This is what has me like amazed is we are still having supply chain issues with pork products. Like I went to the Smart and Final by my house. I wanted to get some of the round sausages because those are the best ones. You could put them on a little, English muffin. And
the little patty sausages.
The little patty ones, those are my favorite. But anyway, they didn't have them, and I was like, "What's going on?" And I talked to the guy who was there, and he was. I'm not like grilling him or anything like that. And I'm like, I notice I come in a lot, and they're not here. And he's like, "Oh yeah, the big restaurants come in and buy up everything like right away." And so it's like, well, when do you get your shipments? He's like, Wednesday. It's like, it's Wednesday, my dude. And he's like, I know they came in early. So it's like, we're still 2 years, past where this was first, like ringing the bell, like, oh my God, shit's going down. And in 2 years, we haven't solved the problem. And
They didn't
that's
even
another.
fucking try to solve it.
No, we didn't. And that's yet another, example of bureaucracy and like shitty big businesses who can't, turn their boats fast enough because of these massive things that like to get stuck in the Suez Canal. Not literally, figuratively in that case, but
Yeah, of course.
yeah. But I
because
mean,
they're behemoths.
yeah,
You
and
know,
so
one
they're
of-
just like not
yeah.
nimble at all. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. One of the most formative documents I ever read was by an anarchist collective. I want to say they called themselves the Curious George Brigade.
Okay.
I'll have to find it, but the title of the pamphlet was called "Anarchy in the Age of Dinosaurs," and
You've told me about this before.
it's
Yeah.
fucking phenomenal. You can obviously it's written by an anarchist collective. It's free online, right? You can just,
Yeah.
they're not gonna fucking copyright that shit and sue you or whatever. Yeah, no, it's free online. Anarchist or Libsyn or Anarchist Library or one of those will have it. Just Google search it. Anyway, phenomenal. My big takeaway from that was about big bureaucracies, big corporations, and how like there's so much inertia behind him. Dinosaurs didn't survive because they were too specialized to an environment that provided a surplus of primary production. So when primary production declines due to, dust or whatever in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
they fucking starved.
Yeah. No more plants, no more dinos.
Exactly. And I think towards the end, they do argue like strategies for taking advantage of that fact that they're too big to change, that they need to consume all this other stuff to exist.
Right.
And then it's really the shrews, right? Like it's the little tiny ones that'll hide in the hole.
Yeah. Wait
That
for the
eventually
massive
inherit the
Tysons
earth.
and the Tysons and the Johnson farms and all that. Or I forget what they're called.
Purdue was the big one in Delaware.
Yeah, just wait for them all to die out and then pop up.
Yeah, and the reality is when those packing plants closed up in like Iowa and stuff, they drove their pigs to California.
Yeah,
because there's the USDA plant not far from here. Actually, it's one of the few, and they drove it here, and then they were just basically giving them away.
Yeah,
it's like they didn't want to. It was cheaper for them to truck them here and get like virtually nothing for them than it was to like find a way to fucking dispose
of a billion carcasses.
Not a billion, but tens of
hundreds of thousands of carcasses.
Of carcasses. And the reality is that like pigs, I've raised and killed my own pigs. It's not
very
fucking
cute.
hard. No. Yeah, they were cute. They were fun. I had fun.
And they were tasty.
And they were delicious. But my point is that it doesn't take a lot to grow a pig, and it doesn't take a lot to slaughter correctly. And we've just created this complex system with all this bureaucracy and all this complication when like
I mean, I'll be the first person to say that like the efficiency of scale is a wonderful thing, but when it means that you're that prone to massive failures when one little thing goes wrong. And, the thing is, it didn't even have to go wrong. Like if they had planned, like we know that pandemics happen. They've happened many times in the past. We're aware of it, but then, we created our entire infrastructure around the idea that we can just pack people into factories, like sardines and make them work in close contact. Like you can spread that shit out. It's not impossible. It takes up more space. It might cost a little bit, more to run, but like, oh, well, you get a little bit less profit. Better than throwing all your profit down the drain while your pigs die.
Right.
Basically just piss poor planning on our part caused a whole lot of emergencies.
It really did. And it's not piss poor planning. They just like the guy said, it's like, oh, well, yeah, we had, or in the last clip, he's like, oh, yeah, we had, this whole pandemic preparedness. It cost $5 million. So you know how much the state of California spends on like putting out forest fires caused by PG&E, the utility company's fucking negligence? A whole lot more than $5 million.
And that company still has not been taken by the state. It is still a privately owned entity.
For-profit company.
All my wishes. I want them to be.
And that should have been nationalized. We're not a country, but
state ownership.
It should have been taken by the state.
Yeah.
After the first fucking fire, after the Tubbs fire.
Yeah.
It should have been like, your company does not have enough assets to offset the cost to the economy and to human lives. that you have caused by your fucking negligence. Not negligence, like, malfeasance. Because they knew the engineers and the inspectors were like, this needs to get fixed. And they're like, oh, well, we're really hoping to have like a banger year with the dividends. So we're just going to put that off.
Yeah.
It's fucking
criminal
shit, man. It's criminal. Exactly.
But it's not treated as a crime.
No, and the crime should be the fucking corporate death penalty. I think we've said that on this show before.
Oh, yes, we have definitely talked
if
about
corporations
it. Big
have
enough,
all
you
the
don't
rights,
deserve to exist.
Yeah, if they have all the constitutional rights of a fucking person, then maybe we should. I mean, I'm against the death penalty, but a corporation isn't a person in my opinion, so you can execute them. Anyway,
it's a big neck to get into the guillotine, though. You really got to cram it in there.
Big corporate neck. We just need a bigger guillotine. Wait a second. We're talking about guillotines, and earlier we were talking about sieging the Hamptons with drones. I think that maybe we should move to the last Martinson clip. Even if there's time on this one, let's move to the last.
I moved ahead. Here you go.
Okay, great.
A single year. But what if we added it all up? And so I did that. And so these are cumulative federal budget deficits. By the way, this is the cash deficit, only cash. This doesn't include all the accrual-based deficits. What's an accrual deficit? That's money you owe to Social Security that isn't in the bank, but you owe it from an actuarial standpoint. That's a accrual-based deficit. If we were accounting for those honestly, the actual position of the U.S. federal government right now is around minus 200 trillion in the hole. Right now, we can see over this period of time, cumulatively, it's expended a little over 20 trillion more than it took in from this period of time right here. The government owes more than that, obviously, but some of that is kept off books, as it's called, in what's the Social Security Trust Fund deficit. But this is just the cash deficit, and this is clearly unsustainable. It's getting steeper and steeper with every passing year, right? You can see that. It's like, whoo, down it goes, right? So that right there is a problem. It's unsustainable. But that's what's going on right now. You can feel the desire to sustain the unsustainable. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everyone wants to kick the can down the road a little further. Every election cycle, maybe somebody gets up and says, oh, this is terrible, but then nobody does anything about it. So we need better representation, better leadership. We need people who are willing to look at this and call it for what it is, unsustainable. Now, why do I care? Because eventually something like this, it breaks. And when something like this breaks, that's when your currency gets kind of ruined in the system, right? And so there are other reasons I'm going to be talking about in part 2 of this, which is over at my website, Peak Prosperity. I think we're facing the possibility in the near future. Is that next Tuesday at 8:30, or is it in 10 years from now? But somewhere in there, can't get the timing right, but I can tell you the trend. The trend says that the United States is risking its currency system with bad leadership, toxic combination, bad leadership, weak leadership, talking to you, Jerome, and a failure to understand the importance of the petrodollar and pissing off all the countries out there who are important to keeping the petrodollar hegemony all intact. We'll talk about.
We've talked about the petrodollar before.
Fuck yeah, we have. And that's the serious thing, dude. Part of it with Ukraine and China having talks, and I don't follow it too closely, but basically my understanding is they were having a discussion of potentially finding another currency to trade oil in. And that's why, I think in our last discussion, we talked about why Gaddafi in Libya was turned from one of the most prosperous states in Africa into a fucking slave trading headquarters or whatever, because he was seriously pushing, he was a pan-Arabist or nationalist or whatever, who was trying to unite everybody behind a gold backed currency to trade oil in. Yeah. And we're like, well, fuck no, we can't have that, because if we're not the global reserve currency for oil, then our currency is not really worth much.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. As we've discussed, oil makes the entire world go round. And if you don't control that, you control nothing.
That is right. And so I don't know, man. I think harping on deficits, I guess, in this case is pretty important. I'm of the opinion that a lot of the inflation that's been happening has been hidden because, like, the whole consumer price index and the basket of goods and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Housing and healthcare were never in there. And I have not been a renter for some time. But I have a lot of friends who are still renters, yourself included. And everybody I talk to is like, fuck, bro, my rent's going up again. Like, my rent goes up every fucking year, but like
Every year,
property
$50.
continues to degrade. And like, and so we're in this spot where like they're not even counting the housing cost. And I can tell you, is that what's going on? Let's just I understand.
There is cooking going on in the kitchen.
I understand. Let's wrap up. Because that's a distraction to me.
Okay.
So I think this was our last clip.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good stuff.
Yeah.
I do think that sometimes we overemphasize the federal budget deficit and don't focus enough on the fact that when money is printed, it's being handed to the banks at 0% interest, so it can be loaned back to people at 25% interest who have to use credit to meet their basic needs because the wages aren't high enough and the rent's too damn high and they got sick, but we don't have fucking health care.
Right.
And all
you got
these other
pregnant and we don't have maternity leave. Yeah. Just all the things
a whole
that we should
host
have.
of things
Yeah.
that you would think that, like, any wealthy country would have.
No, and that's why
most other wealthy countries have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are morally poor.
I was just talking to a friend. He's in my alliance in the MMO. He lives in Ghana.
Jesus Christ, dude.
Well, hey man, it's
a fun game.
It's social interaction.
Sure. It is. It very much is.
We were hanging out talking about
very
Ghana.
much is. Yeah. I miss World of Warcraft for that, but I refuse to play World of Warcraft.
Played that much, but anyway, I was talking to him. He's in Ghana, and we were just kind of talking about various aspects of life there and tourism. A lot of people moving there. I guess expats like to move there because it's cheap and they can open a business or a factory and make a lot of money. But
nice.
Kind of, I guess my point in bringing that up was like, is it really like it's the American empire? Like I wanted to say at one point in the conversation, like, California is like the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world, and there's so much fucking wealth here. Like, you can drive through like a neighborhood in the South Bay or on the peninsula and be like, this is beautiful. Like, everybody here, like, not everybody's filthy rich because like some people just lived there so long that they could afford to stay
they got
there
it when it was affordable.
Yeah, exactly. But still, like, there's so much fucking wealth in this state, and yet there is like an insane amount of poverty.
Yeah,
like
there are areas where you would never know that we were wealthy.
Yeah, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, but yet we're also the largest homeless population in the nation. Really, in the world, because
it's
most other places most other places they don't like clear camps, like shanty towns and favelas or whatever you want to call like the areas where people just move in and build their own housing. Like are common like in every fucking major city in the world, as far as I know, especially in the global south. Like, it's just urbanization is a phenomenon that's been going on for a very long time, and you would think that the wealthiest state or the wealthiest country in the world would have invested resources in proper urbanization, and instead we spend all of our money on fucking bombs and cops.
Cops locally, bombs federally. I mean, what is it? Most towns, I believe, are 60% of their budget is the cops.
It's on par or similar to the federal budget spending on the military. Yeah.
I mean,
65%.
Coming back from that concert, I drove through my hometown, just to get some food. And there's a park where I used to climb trees and play on the playground and whatnot. And I went to point it out to my wife, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's the park where that's a lot of tents, because now it is a shanty town basically, where people throw up their tents and try to survive the incredible heat. because there's
Yeah,
nobody
and
there.
more fucking power to them. I'm not. It's
Yeah.
awful. We should provide fucking housing.
Yeah.
And John Oliver just actually, this is his last, not today's episode, I think, which might post later
Right.
tonight, but last week's. He did cover housing, and I was telling my therapist, I was like, I'm kind of disappointed in his coverage because I know the issue so fucking well.
Right.
We did an episode on it, right? And we're talking quite a bit about it, and ultimately, like, it's impossible to cover that properly, but he did a decent job. People living in their cars who have an eviction because they didn't know that they could get like legal help, or there was no legal help and they didn't know what was happening, and it's all built in the landlord's favor, etc., so forth, and it's just a fucking mess. And once you have an eviction, like, you pretty much need to be handed housing, whether from a family member or from the state, because you like no private landlord's going to let you rent.
Yeah.
Even if you did have a job.
The woman who waited 29 years, I believe it was, in the.
Oh, you saw it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
29 years, and she was like elected to the city at that point, right? Or
yeah. She's like, what the fuck? Okay.
I want to build public housing, and then everybody's like, oh, no. And I found when I was running for office, speaking of running for office, the state of California actually had a constitutional amendment in the early 1950s. Surprise, racism. Redlining. No, they basically made it so that you can, like, public housing has to go to a vote. So we literally enshrined in our constitution NIMBYism, and racism, because like what else was that for? You can't build public housing without a vote of the people who like already live there.
A lot of
this whole
people.
fucking system is designed for bullshit single family homes because it makes the developers a fuck ton of money. So much fucking money.
Oh yeah.
Disgusting amounts of money.
We have a company here, Granville. I don't know how big they are if they exist outside the city, but they make some of the most expensive housing. And of course, we have a rule in the books that says for every, so many units you build of normal housing, you got to build a low income house, or low income housing. It might not even be single family residence. And of course, they always do it on the worst plots, and they always do it with the lowest quality materials that they can. And it's just, and then I think what's most egregious about them is they will buy their own properties. Like, they'll do speculative builds, buy their own properties, and then rent them out.
Oh yeah. It's a fucking mess, dude. Like, like hardly, and it's destroyed communities. Like, the homelessness problem, like, has destroyed, like, sociopolitically has destroyed the fucking community. But that only happened because like the people who own Lulus, which is like, they just got in when the internet was fairly new, and they buy clothes from like Indonesia and fucking Vietnam and stuff, and then they sell them online at a very high price, right? And so they're early internet retailer anyway. They're obviously popular. The two women who fucking started that company own like 120 houses, single family homes in Chico.
Wow.
They're like one of the biggest landlords, except for the corporate landlords. Like, they have a corporation, right? Like a little LLC or something.
Yeah.
But it's just like, they don't need 100 houses. And fortunately, they're not like particular. I've talked to people who live in their houses. They're not super greedy. So their rent increases have been modest and infrequent, right? Wereas like,
it is possible to be slightly better.
But you're still a fucking landlord, which means lampposts. We got drone siege, we got guillotines, we have hanging from lampposts.
Yes.
By their toes. So as to make them uncomfortable, but not actually advocate for violence against them. Is that violence?
I mean, your toes are going to fall off eventually.
You think so?
Yeah, I think they come crashing down to the ground, break their necks.
Yeah, I'm not sure a toe is designed to hold like 152.
An ankle can do it for an extended period of time. You might lose the foot eventually, though.
Yeah, if the blood.
It's okay. Diabetics live without feet all the time.
Yeah.
They'll be fine. They got money. They can buy prosthetics.
Exactly. Oh, you're gonna have to sell one of your 120 houses? Bummer, you only have 119 single family homes.
You know what happens is they get those damn Oscar, Pistorius, Bowflex things, and then they're running down poor people after that.
Fucking Christ. Yeah, his little spring legs.
Yeah, little spring legs.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar because I don't like fucking sports, but
I mean, I don't either, but I saw the technological thing of it, and I was like, whoa, he's going to be faster, and he is. He's faster. Dude.
And I don't know how that's like. Yeah.
Basically,
I don't know how
absorbs,
he's able to compete.
Yeah.
No, I understand the physics and the mechanics of it.
Yeah. I don't think he is allowed anymore due to the murdery aspect of his personality.
That's right. That's another thing. Let's
another
move.
Story.
So anyway, we talked a little bit about inflation. Some of it is printing money, the Fed. Most of that is not being spent on social goods. So let's please not say, oh, it's the budget deficit, therefore we have to like enact austerity. The only class of people that need austerity in this country is the fucking rich people.
Mm-hmm.
The
By
poor have
austerity,
been suffering from austerity
taxes.
forever. Yeah, we just need to tax the rich. It's not a panacea. It's not gonna fucking solve the problem.
It's also not going to break them. And it's also not going to not create jobs. In fact, it'll create more jobs. Because now you've got more money for people to start up smaller businesses.
So tax the rich, break the fucking monopolies, and siege the Hamptons with drones.
Yep, siege the Hampton with drones.
All right, signing out. We'll see you in a couple weeks, I think, right?
Yeah, a couple weeks. We'll come up with a topic in the meantime. We've always got balkanization in the back.
In the back pocket. I want to talk about how we might peacefully dissolve a country. We were talking about complexity in dinosaurs, right?
Right, yeah.
And that's what I want. What that whole conversation would have to consist of is like, how do we do that peacefully? Because obviously, like, war is not good for anybody, and civil wars can be fucking particularly awful. I mean, all war is awful. Civil wars can be particularly awful because families fight each other often.
Right.
And but like obviously we're talking about like how large organizations, bureaucracies can't function, and eventually they break because they're unable to do what they need to do. Well, how can we plan to break them up, and then rather than break under their own weight, we can precisely carve them up with a scalpel and make something more manageable in terms of like more accessible democratically, more responsive to policy, like economic policy. Jane Jacobs talks in The City and the Wealth of Nations. She talks a lot about how like currency should be able to be manipulated if you have a depression or some kind of crisis in your region. You should be able to affect your currency to make your goods more attractive to buyers abroad. But you can't do that when you're you have a bunch of regions tied under a single currency in the state. And the federal system, was essentially designed to keep power among the ruling classes, right?
Yeah.
Our founding fathers, these fucking people flying the Gadsden flag, talking about the founding fathers. Like, the founding fathers fucking created a system to maintain ruling class hegemony. It did not create a democratic system. It did not build a system that maximizes our fucking freedom.
Nope.
Just like every government before it, the ruling class finds a way to maintain its status and wealth. And it only breaks in a revolution, and then a new ruling class emerges.
Yeah.
Egalitarianism is possible. We could talk about that along with balkanization, because my fantasy is the Confederated Communes of California and Cascadia. And so we're just
got a good name.
Fuck yeah,
what is that?
C4. C4. We're gonna blow the motherfucker up. The Confederated Communes of California and Cascadia. And it basically be like a European Union of communes, and commune meaning like a small administrative unit that's very responsive.
No cult behavior required. That's what y'all are thinking.
Direct democracy, et cetera, so forth. Anyway, we can talk about that another day. It's been fun. We talked about inflation. It's not from social spending. It is from greedy fucking cocktail billionaires wanting to keep their billionaire buddies happy, make sure they can get
manufacturers.
They need to get a new little yacht to fit inside their bigger yacht, and need to eat expensive crab salad from Ina Garden. That's very specific, but yeah, the Barefoot Contessa recalled a story when she opened her delicatessen in the Hamptons, and how the first customer she had he was like on the phone and not even paying attention to her, like a fucking asshole, right?
Yeah.
And then he like tastes a sample. He's like, okay, I'll have, I'll have 30. And she's like, 30 what? And he's 30 pounds. 30 pounds of crab salad that I'm selling for like $150 a pound. Yeah, I want 30 of them. And she was like, oh, I made it, or whatever. But those are the kind of people we could besiege them. They're kind of fucking ruling classes don't fucking survive what's happening, man. They don't.
They're a little feckless, yeah.
Yeah, and all those people that own all this fight, especially the corporate landlords. It's like if once the legal system collapses, private property is a legal fucking fiction, dude. Like, really, you want space? It's in for like Mal was right, bro. Like power flows from the barrel of a gun. Like,
yeah, and that's why the police are around. It's the only reason they exist, is to protect that property.
Precisely,
Make sure
but
we don't take it.
As several insurrections in this country have shown, police are outnumbered.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they just have to be starved. That's why they get such a big budget. Their families aren't going fucking hungry.
No.
So they'll be obedient because they'll see all the hungry people and they'll grab their fucking truncheons and their shields and they'll come break fucking skulls of people who just want to eat. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. Remember, everybody, when democracy dies, it dies
with thunderous applause.
All right, take it easy, my friend.
You too.
Peace.
Bye.